So this is where I began. Part of my job in software development was in writing pattern recognition software, and I've searched patterns ever since I was a kid.
So you applied it to this.
Sure, it comes very naturally for me. I used to look at patterns on flashing patterns on blinking lights on Christmas trees, and I mean you see them everywhere. So I thought, if there are patterns in nature, and we are nature, they should show up in our DNA. And it was in the 80s when the DNA databases, we could actually begin to access them without being part of the research projects. So to make a long story really brief, what I found was in one of the most obscure and ancient of the texts, a book called the Sefer Yetzirah.
What is that?
It is a Hebrew text that has only been translated a couple of times of a couple of authors into English. It's so mysterious, George, that very few scholars even want to talk about it because they don't know what to say about it. It's a brief text. It's only about 2,000 lines.
All right.
And it is written as if an observer were present the day that the Creator created humankind, step by step. However, it's written in a language that doesn't make a lot of sense to us
Is it like
today.
Genesis or totally different?
It's very different from Genesis. I think Genesis probably partially derived from this text, the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of creation. It literally translates to the book of creation. So it was as if someone were watching the Creator actually create the first person.
Doing what he did.
Doing what he did, but it is not written scientifically. The bottom line to what the text is saying is that through language, humankind was created.
What if the greatest lie of our age is not what we don't know, but what we've been taught to ignore? What if the word junk is not a neutral scientific label, but a lock on a treasure chest? They told you 90% of your DNA was useless, honest, harmless debris left over from slow evolution. They put it in textbooks and in headlines, and most of us believed it because it sounded scientific and tidy. But what if that junk is the most advanced technology on Earth? What if those silent strings of code are not idle but active? A fractal antenna tuned to weave together matter, meaning, and mind. Imagine for a moment a palace with 100 rooms. Someone taught you that only 2 rooms are useful, the kitchen and the bedroom. They labeled the rest storage, locked the doors, and told you not to look inside. You moved through life thinking scarcity was built into the architecture. Now imagine finding the key. You stand before the last locked door, and inside is not junk, but a window to the sky, a control room, an observatory, an engine that talks to stars. This is the secret that ancient builders, shamans, and sages encoded into ritual and myth. And it is the secret modern science is only beginning to glimpse in the margins. But to understand it fully, you must be willing to question everything you were told about your body, your biology, and the nature of reality itself. Because the truth changes everything. Your DNA is not merely a recipe book for your cells. It is a living antenna, fractal, holographic, and responsive, capable of receiving frequencies from fields beyond the visible and transmitting intentions back into the weave of the world. Your thoughts, your feelings, the way you inhabit your life, these are not private musings. They are signals. They tune your antenna. They program what unfolds. You are now at a threshold. On the other side of this narration sits the commonplace: fear, separation, compliance, the control system that benefits when humans forget their power. On the other side sits possibility, abundance, collective coherence, the conscious co-creation of reality. Tonight, I will not teach you to be someone else. I will show you how to be more yourself, to unlock rooms you never suspected were there, and to tune the antenna that you already carry in your bones. If you are ready, hold this image. Your DNA as an antenna, not junk. Your feelings as frequency. Your choices as a recalibration. Listen closely. What follows is history, God, and initiation, and it is an invitation. Long before laboratories and peer review, human beings carried an awareness that reality responds to resonance. They encoded it into myth, ritual, architecture, and song. They did not write it in textbooks, but they left monuments and oral traditions as evidence. Consider the Egyptians. Their pyramids were not simply burial chambers. The alignment of those vast stones to cardinal directions, solstices, and constellations speaks of something far deeper than funerary architecture. These structures resonate like giant instruments built on principles of proportion and frequency. Subterranean chambers amplify sound, passageways reverberate with particular tones. To step into such a place was not merely to enter a tomb, but to stand inside a tuning fork for consciousness. The Egyptians understood vibration as causal, and their monuments were antennas carved into stone. Move eastward, and you encounter the Vedic masters of India. They taught that sound itself is the fabric of reality, and they gave precise instructions for how to use it. Their mantras were not abstract poetry or decorative prayer. Each syllable was chosen for resonance, its vibration shaping the nervous system and influencing states of mind. Through sustained repetition, practitioners could alter chemistry, regulate breath, and induce expanded states of awareness. They knew that the body was an instrument, and sound was the tuning key. The Gnostic sects of the Mediterranean carried another whisper of this truth. Their writings insist that divine light is not only external but encoded within the human body itself. They declared that flesh is not a prison, but a vessel for light. This was dangerous knowledge for the empires of their time. If the divine is within you, then temples and intermediaries lose their monopoly. The Gnostics taught that awakening comes not from outside salvation, but from remembering your origin as consciousness itself. For this, they were suppressed, their texts burned, their teachers silenced. Yet fragments remain, bearing witness to a worldview in which human beings are active participants in the cosmos, not passive subjects. Across the ocean, the shamans of the Andes preserved a similar message. For them, a person is not separate from nature, but a bridge between earth and sky. They describe humans as receivers of signals from mountains, rivers, and stars. Rituals with plants, feathers, fire, and song were never random superstitions. They were systematic methods of opening perception, of aligning the body and mind with fields of intelligence that pulse through the natural world. The shaman did not simply believe in invisible forces. They experienced them, mapped them, and taught others how to navigate them. Though these cultures were distant in geography, they converged on the same recognition. Human beings are antennas. The body is receptive, reality responds to frequency, and consciousness directs the tuning. Their practices differed: stone temples, chants, visionary plants, secret texts, but their conclusions overlapped. Resonance is not decoration. Resonance is law. And yet, as civilizations centralized power, this knowledge became inconvenient. The more an empire wished to control its citizens, the more it suppressed any teaching that gave sovereignty back to the individual. If people learned that their own consciousness could shape experience, then priests, kings, and later institutions of science would lose their authority. So the teachings were buried. They survived in fragments, hidden in monasteries, whispered in rituals, disguised in parables, and encoded in architecture. What could not be erased was at least obscured. The suppression itself is evidence. If these practices were harmless superstition, why would empires fear them? Why destroy manuscripts, ban chants, outlaw rituals, burn teachers at the stake? Because beneath the poetic language lay a technology, a method to awaken the antenna within each person, a method that made individuals less dependent on external authority. Look closely, and you can still see the fingerprints of this suppression. Religious institutions that transform inner liberation into outer obedience. Political systems that thrive on fear, discouraging any direct exploration of consciousness. Even modern science, for all its brilliance, often inherits the same bias. It reduces human beings to machines, stripping away the mystery that points to a greater truth. But despite centuries of obscuration, the whispers remain. The pyramids still stand. The mantras still resonate. The Gnostic texts resurface. The shamans still sing. What unites them is not nostalgia or superstition, but method. They were experimenting with resonance, observing that states of consciousness could be shifted, that reality itself seemed to bend around the quality of inner vibration. They knew the body was not inert matter. They knew it was an interface, a bridge, a receiver. This is the whisper we must learn to hear again. It tells us that our DNA is not silent code. It is the modern name for what the ancients were pointing toward all along, an antenna embedded in flesh, waiting to be tuned. To dismiss these traditions as primitive is to underestimate them. They were engineers of the invisible, cartographers of resonance. And their message, still alive beneath the ashes of suppression, is that you already possess the architecture to connect with the cosmos. To honor the ancients without romanticizing them, we must also look at what modern inquiry reveals. This is not a manifesto against science. On the contrary, science becomes a powerful ally when it dares to step beyond reductionism. For in its own language, it has begun to circle the very truths that sages once sang. Start with epigenetics. For decades, the genetic dogma was clear. DNA is destiny. Your sequence is fixed, your biology predetermined, your life largely written in code. But epigenetics shattered that narrative. Researchers discovered that genes behave less like dictatorial commands and more like instruments in an orchestra. Whether a violin plays or rests depends not just on the notes on paper, but on the conductor, the mood, the surrounding musicians. In biology, that conductor is environment, nutrition, toxins, stress, social conditions, and yes, even your habitual thoughts and emotions. This means that gene expression is dynamic. Identical DNA can generate radically different outcomes depending on signals received. Stress hormones can silence repair genes. Gratitude practices can boost immune function. Trauma can leave molecular scars that echo across generations. Your biology is not a frozen script. It is responsive, plastic, sensitive to state. That sensitivity is the first scientific confirmation that consciousness is not a spectator. Your feelings are not decorative. They are chemical signals, hormonal instructions, electromagnetic shifts that tell your DNA which instruments to play. The implication is staggering. You are not simply reading your genetic code, you are constantly editing its performance. Now consider quantum physics. Here lies the most controversial bridge, often misused, but impossible to ignore. At the quantum level, matter is probability. Particles exist in superposition until measured. An observation collapses the wave into a specific outcome. This is not spiritual metaphor, but scientific description. And while debates rage about interpretation, one fact is undeniable. The act of measurement matters. Reality at its smallest scale does not sit inert, waiting to be discovered. It responds to the conditions of inquiry. Some physicists argue that consciousness is irrelevant, that any interaction counts as measurement. Others admit that the role of the observer remains deeply mysterious. But regardless of interpretation, quantum mechanics cracked the certainty of a clockwork universe. It showed that reality is relational, participatory, and far stranger than deterministic equations predicted. From this strangeness, we glimpse possibility. If observation influences outcome at the quantum level, and if DNA is built on quantum-sensitive processes, proton tunneling, electron clouds, photonic emissions, then consciousness may indeed reach deeper into biology than classical science assumed. The ancients intuited it as myth. Physics hints at it in mathematics. Then we come to morphogenetic fields. Mainstream biology attributes form to genes, but there remain gaps. How does a caterpillar's soup of dissolved cells reorganize into a butterfly? How do complex organs assemble with such precision? Genes provide ingredients, but blueprints seem to exist at another level. Rupert Sheldrake and other theorists proposed morphogenetic fields, organizing patterns that guide development. These fields are not matter themselves, but informational structures. Skeptics dismiss the idea, but evidence accumulates that something beyond DNA directs form. Identical genetic material can yield different shapes in different contexts. Regenerative organisms rebuild missing limbs, guided by invisible templates. Morphogenetic fields, whether we use that term or another, offer an elegant solution. Life is guided not only by molecules, but by fields of information. If such fields exist, then DNA's role may be less about storing every detail and more about acting as an interface with larger informational matrices. Just as a radio does not contain every song but tunes into a broadcast, DNA may not contain every pattern of life but connects to fields where those patterns reside. Its fractal geometry makes it ideally suited for such reception. This brings us to biophotonics. In recent decades, scientists discovered that DNA emits ultra-weak light, photons released in rhythm, sometimes coherent like lasers. These emissions are not random sparks, but appear to regulate cell communication. Cells talk in light. The body glows, invisibly, with fields of biophotons, and DNA, the tightly wound spiral of nucleotides, acts as both the source and the receiver of this light. Consider the implication. If DNA is a light emitter and receptor, it is literally a biological antenna. Antennas work by resonance. They send and receive frequencies based on geometry. Fractal antennas are prized in engineering because they can handle multiple frequencies efficiently. DNA's double helix, with its repeating, self-similar patterns, is the most sophisticated fractal antenna we know. It is designed to resonate across scales from molecular to cosmic. The ancients left us symbols. Modern science gives us data. But to bridge them, we need a clear model. How does DNA function as an antenna? How do thoughts and feelings become signals? How does the invisible translate into the tangible? Let us strip away the mysticism for a moment and look with operational eyes. Picture your DNA not as static text, but as coiled architecture. Each strand is twisted into a double helix, looped into chromatin, folded into chromosomes. It is not straight code, but spiraled geometry. That spiral is a fractal, repeating patterns nested within larger patterns. Engineers use fractal geometry in antennas because it allows one structure to capture multiple frequencies across scales. The geometry multiplies sensitivity. Your DNA, replicated trillions of times in every cell, forms a vast internal network of fractal antennas. These structures are immersed in fluids, bathed in electromagnetic fields, pulsing with ions and photons. They are exquisitely sensitive to vibration. They are not passive. They are listening. When you think a thought, neurons fire in patterns. Those firings generate electromagnetic activity. When you feel an emotion, your body releases cascades of hormones, shifts your heart rhythm, alters your breath. Each emotion carries a distinct electromagnetic and biochemical signature. Fear is fast, jagged, incoherent. Love is smooth, expansive, coherent. Gratitude slows the heart and synchronizes rhythms. Rage spikes cortisol and fragments coherence. These internal states become the environment in which DNA operates. Remember epigenetics. Gene expression responds to environment. Your consciousness creates part of that environment. Every belief, every story you repeat to yourself, every habitual emotional tone is a set of instructions whispered to your DNA. Transmits them. Which frequencies it can access depends on its tuning. Change the tuning, and you change both what it hears and what it sends. Emotion is the tuning dial. Fear narrows the dial. It compresses your bandwidth, locks you onto survival frequencies, limits perception. When you are afraid, your DNA is tuned to short-term protective expression. Stress hormones, inflammation, fight or flight programming. Your field broadcasts contraction, and you attract confirming evidence. Small crises, conflicts, coincidences that mirror the state you inhabit. Love and elevated emotion expand the dial. They widen bandwidth, allowing your antenna to couple with higher harmonics. When you practice gratitude, awe, compassion, or creative joy, your DNA expresses differently. Immune function improves, repair genes activate, coherence rises. Your field broadcasts expansion, and you notice opportunities, synchronicities, and patterns that fear kept invisible. This is not poetic license. Studies show that heart coherence influences brain states, that meditative gratitude changes gene expression, that stress rewires immunity. The mechanism is simple. Emotions shift biochemistry. Biochemistry shifts genetic expression. DNA shifts photon emission. Photon emission shifts communication between cells and with the larger field. The loop is continuous, but the most extraordinary piece is the feedback. Because DNA is also an antenna, the state you broadcast attracts matching information. Like a radio, your body begins to resonate with external frequencies that mirror your internal setting. Fear tunes you into fear narratives, fear-based communities, fear-biased media. Love tunes you into loving people, creative possibilities, and coherence-supporting environments. Your life, then, is not only shaped by external forces, it is sculpted by the frequencies you habitually broadcast. You are participating in the programming of your reality, not just consuming it. This is why practices matter. It is why ritual is not superstition, but technology. When you deliberately induce coherence through breathwork, humming, visualization, prayer, or meditation, you are training your antenna to lock onto a different signal. Do it once, and you feel temporary relief. Do it daily, and you create a stable broadcast. Do it for months, and your biology reorganizes. The palace doors begin to open. Think of it like tuning a radio. The symphony is always broadcasting. If you sit with static, you may believe no music exists, but the music has never stopped. Turn the dial, and the symphony floods in. Likewise, the higher frequencies of abundance, intuition, and unity are always present. Your DNA can couple to them, but you must tune. Here lies the subtlety. Tuning is not only intellectual. You cannot simply think positive while harboring unconscious fear. The antenna listens to coherence, not to slogans. You must feel it, embody it, generate it as real. Elevated emotion is the carrier wave. Thought gives direction, but feeling provides power. Without feeling, thought is weak. With feeling, thought is a signal. This is why the ancients insisted on song, breath, ritual, and embodied practice. They knew the body must participate. They knew tuning was holistic: heart, breath, voice, imagination. Today, science confirms it. Heart rate variability is a biomarker of coherence. Breathing patterns shift brain waves. Visualization changes brain structure. DNA responds to intention when carried by coherent states. The practical implication is radical. Your daily state is not trivial, it is the master control. Every time you slip into fear and stay there, you are narrowing your antenna. Every time you choose gratitude, awe, or compassion, you are widening it. Over days, weeks, and years, these micro-choices accumulate. They become the architecture of your reality. This is why the so-called law of attraction is often misunderstood. It is not that the universe simply gives you what you think about. It is that your DNA antenna tunes you into fields that match your felt state. You align with probability paths coherent with your vibration. You walk into realities that others cannot perceive because their antennas are tuned differently. And here is the most empowering part. Tuning is always available. You cannot always control circumstance, but you can practice state. You can hum, breathe, visualize, declare. You can shift your internal weather. Even in crisis, you can choose coherence. That choice, repeated, reprograms biology, shifts photon emission, and recalibrates your antenna. The external world begins to follow, is simple and profound. DNA is the antenna. Emotion is the dial. Thought is the signal carried. Coherence is the amplifier. Practice is the discipline, and reality responds. Once you grasp this, the suppression of such knowledge makes perfect sense. A population trained to tune its own antenna would be unpredictable, sovereign, difficult to control. Institutions thrive when humans forget their power. Reclaiming the antenna is not only personal healing, it is rebellion. It is liberation. You are not a machine trapped in genetic determinism. You are not a passive consumer of a fixed world. You are a transmitter-receiver designed for resonance. The palace is waiting, and the keys are in your emotions. The question is simple. What frequency will you choose? Every age has its dominant story about what a human being is. That story is not neutral. It serves power. And the story you were born into is this: you are a machine made of flesh. Your consciousness an accidental byproduct. Your DNA a fixed script with most of its code meaningless. You are replaceable, predictable, and ultimately powerless, except through external systems. Governments, economies, institutions, and authorities. This is the control system. It is not one villain in a cloak pulling levers in a hidden chamber. It is the accumulation of habits, narratives, and structures that keep human beings tuned to fear and separation. It benefits those in power, yes, but it also perpetuates itself automatically. Like a self-reinforcing program, it spreads by teaching each generation to believe in its own smallness. The control system is built on fear. Fear of scarcity, that there is never enough, so you must compete. Fear of judgment, that you are inadequate unless approved. Fear of punishment, that stepping outside the norm will destroy you. Fear of death, that existence itself is fragile and meaningless. These fears tune your antenna downward, narrow your bandwidth, and keep you locked in survival mode. Notice how often fear is broadcast. Turn on the news, crisis after crisis, always unsolvable, always escalating. Scroll through social media. Algorithms prioritize outrage because outrage captures attention. Look at advertising. It whispers, "You are incomplete until you buy." These are not accidents. They are profitable. A fearful population is predictable, and predictability is currency for those who manage economies and institutions. Even religion, which at its root carries wisdom, has been recruited into the control system. Instead of teaching that divinity is within, many traditions tell you salvation lies outside, in temples, hierarchies, intermediaries. Instead of awakening your antenna, they train you to outsource power. Instead of teaching initiation, they preach obedience. The flame of wisdom becomes a leash. Science, too, despite its brilliance, is not immune. When funding depends on predictability and conformity, radical ideas are ridiculed. The narrative of junk DNA was not just an innocent mislabeling. It reinforced the story that most of what you are is meaningless. It minimized human potential and supported the reductionist worldview. Conveniently, it also discouraged exploration of DNA's energetic or informational capacities, areas that could not be monetized easily by pharmaceutical or industrial models. The result is a civilization that treats humans as consumers and cogs, not creators. Education teaches memorization, not imagination. Medicine treats symptoms, not frequencies. Media sells distraction, not coherence. People are trained to live in 2 rooms of the palace, never questioning the locked doors. But here is the rebellion. To remember the palace exists, to remember that DNA is an antenna, not junk, to remember that consciousness is causal, not incidental, to reclaim sovereignty over your own frequency. Rebellion is not merely political protest. It is not storming buildings or shouting slogans. Those actions have their place. But the deeper rebellion is quieter, more radical, and far more subversive. It is the choice to refuse fear as your primary state. It is the discipline to practice coherence when the world demands chaos. It is the courage to declare, "My biology is not owned by your narrative." Every time you hum in the morning, every time you breathe yourself into gratitude, every time you visualize your DNA lighting with golden light, you are rebelling. You are undermining centuries of conditioning. You are reclaiming territory that the control system never wanted you to discover. This rebellion is contagious. Coherence spreads. When one person maintains a stable, elevated frequency, others around them unconsciously attune. Heart rhythms synchronize, moods lift, conversations shift. Over time, networks of coherence form. These networks do not need central leaders or propaganda. They operate through resonance, like tuning forks vibrating in sympathy. This is why the control system works so hard to keep people fragmented and afraid. It knows, perhaps not consciously, but instinctively, that coherence is revolutionary. A population that remembers its antenna cannot be manipulated as easily. It cannot be herded by fear. It begins to self-organize, self-heal, and self-direct. Imagine what happens when thousands, then millions of people choose coherence. Imagine workplaces where meetings begin with 3 minutes of breath. Imagine schools where children learn to tune their state before solving problems. Imagine neighborhoods where conflict is approached not with accusation, but with collective recalibration. These are not utopian fantasies. They are entirely practical when you understand the mechanism. The rebellion, then, is both personal and collective. On the personal level, it is refusing to remain a victim of fear narratives. On the collective level, it is seeding practices of coherence into communities until they become cultural norms. This is how revolutions truly succeed. Not only by overthrowing institutions, but by making the old systems irrelevant. Do not mistake this for passivity. The rebellion requires courage. To practice coherence in a fear-driven world is to swim upstream. To claim that your emotions are sovereign is to defy billion-dollar industries designed to manipulate them. To assert that your DNA is not junk is to challenge entrenched dogmas. You will meet resistance, skepticism, ridicule, dismissal. But remember, suppression is always a clue. If the knowledge were truly meaningless, no one would bother to silence it, and so you stand at a fork. One path is the well-worn trail of compliance, the frequency of fear, the comfort of conformity. The other is the narrow, luminous path of rebellion, the frequency of coherence, the courage of sovereignty. One path leads to predictability, the other to possibility. The choice is yours, and the rebellion begins not with armies, not with slogans, but with a single breath tuned to love instead of fear, with a single decision to recalibrate your antenna, with a single refusal to let the control system dictate the bandwidth of your being. That is the quiet revolution, and it is already underway. Up to now, we have looked backward to the ancients and inward to the antenna within. But to awaken fully, we must also look forward, because the question is not only what have we forgotten, it is what could we become if we remember. If DNA is an antenna and consciousness is the tuner, then humanity is a symphony waiting to be played. We are not condemned to repeat the cycles of fear and control forever. A different future is possible, one built not on the dominance of machines over flesh, but on the partnership of consciousness with matter. Picture a civilization where coherence is the foundation of culture. Imagine cities designed not just for efficiency, but for resonance. The geometry of buildings tuned to amplify harmony. Public spaces shaped like living mandalas, where sound and light are engineered to support clarity of mind and expansion of heart. Technology still exists, but it does not enslave attention. Instead, it mirrors and amplifies the innate capacities of the human antenna. In such a world, communication is no longer bottlenecked through devices alone. Words remain useful, but they are complemented by direct resonance. People learn to project coherent states, and those states are felt as clearly as spoken sentences. Misunderstandings dissolve quickly because intention is transparent. Communities resolve conflict not by shouting louder, but by entering coherence together until solutions reveal themselves. Energy, too, transforms. Instead of mining the earth endlessly, societies learn to draw from the fields of coherence themselves. Imagine gardens that grow faster because they are tended with structured intention. Imagine energy systems that respond to collective states of gratitude rather than extracting fuel. This is not fantasy. Early experiments already show that intention can affect plant growth, water crystallization, even electronic systems. Scale this with a culture of practice, and the implications are revolutionary. Education shifts as well. Children are no longer trained as workers for an economy of consumption. They are initiated as sovereign beings. From the earliest age, they learn how to breathe into coherence, how to hum into resonance, how to shape their antenna consciously. Mathematics is taught alongside morphogenetic principles. History is taught as cycles of remembering and forgetting. Science is taught as an exploration of how consciousness interacts with fields. Children grow up knowing they are participants, not prisoners. And what of governance? Imagine politics not as manipulation of fear, but as orchestration of coherence. Leaders are not chosen for their charisma or cunning, but for their ability to stabilize collective fields. A true leader in such a civilization is a tuning fork, someone whose personal practice radiates clarity strong enough to align thousands. Decisions are not made in secret chambers, but in circles of resonance, where the collective field reveals the wisest path. Even technology itself evolves. Artificial intelligence continues to advance, but it becomes a partner rather than a master. Just as DNA is a biological antenna, AI is a silicon antenna, processing vast patterns of information. But in this future, AI is guided by coherent human intention. It becomes a mirror for our higher states, rather than an amplifier of our lower impulses. What AI does with silicon, human DNA does with light. Together, they create civilizations where consciousness and technology harmonize instead of compete. Now stretch your imagination further. What happens when entire networks of awakened humans synchronize their antennas? Cities begin to hum like tuning forks. Nations become resonant nodes. Humanity as a species develops a planetary coherence field. The Earth itself vibrates differently. Wars dissolve because the very frequency that creates them, fear and separation, cannot stabilize in a coherent field. Commerce evolves into exchange of resonance, creativity, and contribution. Art becomes not escape, but activation. This is not a sterile utopia. It is alive, dynamic, sometimes chaotic, always creative. It does not eliminate challenge. It transforms challenge into opportunities for recalibration. Death does not vanish. It becomes another doorway of resonance. Individuality does not dissolve. It flowers more fully because coherence provides the soil for diversity to thrive without fragmentation. Skeptics will say this is impossible. But remember, every civilization was once impossible. The stone pyramids were impossible. Flight was impossible. Wireless communication was impossible. The impossible is simply the name we give to realities our current antenna cannot yet tune. Shift the dial, and the impossible becomes the obvious. This future is not guaranteed. It is a potential field waiting for enough antennas to resonate with it. The palace doors open when many of us choose to turn the key. That is the invitation, not to wait passively for a golden age, but to practice coherence daily so that the golden age becomes inevitable. The myth of the ancients becomes the blueprint of the future. The forgotten technologies of resonance become the civic practices of tomorrow. The DNA antenna, once dismissed as junk, becomes the central axis of a civilization built not on fear, but on frequency. And you, listening now, are not an observer of this prophecy. You are a participant. The civilization of consciousness is seeded by individuals who dare to live as antennas today. Each time you hum, breathe, visualize, or choose love, you are not just healing yourself. You are laying the bricks of that future city. You are tuning not only your DNA, but the collective DNA of humanity. So do not ask, when will it come? Ask, what am I tuning now? Because the future is not a place we travel to. It is a frequency we practice into being. Every manifesto, if it is to be more than words, must end in practice. Knowledge without embodiment becomes another story filed away in the library of the mind. But when knowledge is carried into the body, it transforms. It shifts chemistry, reorganizes patterns, and makes the invisible visible. Throughout history, initiations marked the moment when knowledge became living. Shamans guided apprentices through fasting, chanting, and vision quests. Mystics demanded silence, solitude, or ordeal. Scribes encoded rites into texts and temples, not as dogma, but as living protocols. The pattern is always the same. To awaken the antenna, you must cross a threshold, and you cross with practice. So here is the initiation for you. It is not elaborate. It does not require sacred sites or rare instruments. The antenna is already in you. The key is coherence. The ritual I will give you is simple enough for a child, yet powerful enough to recalibrate your DNA if repeated consistently. Call it the antenna tune. Sit or stand with your spine upright. Place one hand over your heart and the other on your belly. Inhale through the nose for a slow count of 4. Hold gently for 1. Exhale through the mouth for a count of 6. Repeat 3 times. This breath pattern signals safety to your nervous system, reduces cortisol, and begins to synchronize heart and brain rhythms. You are telling your antenna, I am ready to tune. On the next exhale, hum a single note. Low, steady, gentle. Feel the vibration in your chest, ribs, and skull. Let the sound massage your body from the inside. Sustain it for 20-30 seconds, then pause. Repeat 3 times. Science shows humming increases nitric oxide, which dilates blood vessels and enhances oxygen flow. Spiritually, it aligns your field into coherence. This hum is the switch that moves DNA from static to resonance. Close your eyes. See your DNA as spirals of light inside every cell. Imagine each helix unfolding like golden threads, room after room of the palace opening. With each breath, the strands glow brighter, as if connected to an infinite cosmic network. Feel the light expand beyond your skin, as if your body is both receiver and transmitter of a universal signal. This image is not fantasy. Visualization alters neural pathways and influences gene expression through state-dependent signaling. Speak a short I am statement, either silently or aloud. Choose one that affirms the frequency you wish to inhabit today. Examples: I am a coherent antenna of abundance. I am a transmitter of love and wisdom. I am tuned to unity and creation. The power lies not in the words, but in the felt conviction behind them. Declare as if it is already true. Your DNA listens to coherence, not doubt. Release the image. Release the words. Sit in stillness for one final minute, breathing naturally. Trust that the signal has been sent, the antenna tuned. You do not need to force results. You need only to practice consistently. The field responds to stability. Before sleep, replay one moment from the day that you wish had unfolded differently. Instead of rehearsing regret, revise it. Imagine it as you would have preferred. The conversation ending with harmony, the task completed with ease, the chance meeting unfolding into opportunity. See it vividly, feel it as real, and then let it go. This simple ritual imprints new frequencies into your memory field, gently reprogramming your antenna for coherence even while you sleep. You may wonder why such simplicity? Why humming, breathing, visualizing? Because rituals operate at the intersection of mind, body, and field. They engage breath, which influences the nervous system. They engage sound, which entrains rhythm. They engage imagination, which the brain treats as reality. They engage intention, which programs attention. Together, they create coherence, and coherence is the master key. This initiation is not about believing, it is about doing. Skeptics can hum and still receive nitric oxide benefits. Pragmatists can visualize and still activate neural circuits. The mystical overlays the practical. The palace opens whether you call it biology or magic. But consistency is the gatekeeper. Do it once and you feel calm. Do it daily for 21 days and you feel different. Do it for 90 days and your life begins to reorganize. Synchronicities appear, relationships shift, opportunities surface. Not because you forced reality, but because you tuned to a different station. This is your initiation, not a lecture, but a practice. A simple, embodied ritual that makes you a participant in the manifesto, not just a listener. Each morning, each evening, you are invited to turn the dial of your antenna. The ancients used chants, temples, and ceremonies. Today, you can begin with breath, hum, visualization, and declaration. The tools are simple because the antenna is already perfect. All it needs is tuning. So take this protocol not as suggestion, but as passage. Begin tomorrow morning. Begin tonight. Begin now. The palace is waiting, and the key is already in your hands. You have walked through a journey that began with a question. What if your DNA is not junk, but a cosmic antenna? You have heard the whispers of the ancients. You have seen the evidence of modern science. You have traced the mechanism of tuning through emotion and coherence. You have recognized the control system that thrives on your forgetfulness, and you have glimpsed a future where humanity remembers and builds civilizations of consciousness. Now the path narrows to a single point. You, because no manifesto has power unless it is lived. Words can inspire, knowledge can intrigue, but only practice transforms. The antenna does not awaken because you believe in it. It awakens because you tune it. And tuning is a choice renewed each day. You must understand this. The universe is not waiting to grant permission. The palace doors are not locked by external hands. They are unlocked from within by your decision to calibrate your frequency. Every breath, every hum, every moment of gratitude or wonder is a key turned in the lock. Fear will try to reclaim you. The control system will whisper that you are foolish, that nothing has changed, that you are too small to matter. But those whispers are static. They are not truth. The truth is that you are already broadcasting. You have always been broadcasting. The only question is, to which frequency? Will you remain tuned to the narrow bandwidth of fear and separation, or will you expand into the broad spectrum of unity, abundance, and creation? Will you outsource your power to narratives of scarcity, or will you reclaim sovereignty by becoming conscious of the signal you send? The choice is not abstract. It begins now. So let this be your initiation, not tomorrow, not someday, but here, in this very breath. Place your hand on your chest, inhale deeply, feel the hum of life within you, recognize it as signal. Whisper, even silently, I am an antenna of light. I am tuned to coherence. I am activated. This declaration is not a slogan, it is a vow, a line drawn in the field of reality. And when you cross that line, you do not walk alone. Across the world, others are crossing with you. Rebels of coherence, remembering together, each one humming, each one breathing, each one tuning the collective signal. So if you feel the resonance, if something in you stirred during these words, mark the moment. Speak it aloud, write it, share it, anchor it into matter. Let your first act of rebellion be simple and undeniable. Comment with the phrase, I am activated. Not as flattery, not as ritual for me, but as an oath to yourself. Let this small public signal become the seed of a private revolution. A revolution that begins in your breath and expands outward into every choice you make. A revolution that transforms not by violence, but by frequency. A revolution that remembers, DNA is not junk, consciousness is not accident, and you are not powerless. You are the signal. You are the transmitter. You are the receiver. You are the bridge between cosmos and flesh. You are the song the universe has been waiting to hear again. And it begins the moment you choose to hum, to breathe, to declare, I am activated.